Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. Welcome today to my full review of this, the latest piece by Direnzo. It's the DRZ05, aka the Solaris, and it's their entry into the burgeoning dual crown diver market. Couple of things before we go on. You saw the pop-up, I'm sure. This video is sponsored by Direnzo. They'll be sending me one of these in the colour of my choosing in February once the production run is complete. And I always like to declare in Direnzo videos my personal bias. I really like these watches. This is now the fourth one that I've looked at. I looked at their 02 model way back 3 years ago, following that up with reviews of their 3, the 4 and today the 5. And indeed here is a little bit of a family gathering. That's the 3 on the left, the 4 in the middle and today's subject matter, the 5 on the right. Now you can see a strong similarity between all three, I think, kind of retro futuristic styling. The hands from the 3 definitely featuring strongly on the 5. The indices from the 3 again similar but slightly different to the indices on the 4. Not identical though, there are big differences between all 3 models, but I must admit I like the look of all 3 models. And I think that Direnzo in some ways is the quintessential micro brand. It's owned and operated by one man, Sergio Direnzo, and he designs these watches himself. And this year he quit his day job to focus on his watch brand. That is surely the dream of many of the hundreds of men and women who have started their own micro brands over the last few years. So the question today is not, do I like this watch or is it any good? Because it is good and I do like it. The question then becomes, is it my favourite Direnzo so far? Let's flip the camera and find out. Right then, while I'm taking this one out of the box, let's talk about that burgeoning dual crown compressor style dive watch market. This time last year, I would have told you that there weren't any decent ones available. This time this year, I'm thinking, can I get away with reviewing yet another dual crown dive watch before Christmas? So far in 2021, I've looked at the Phoebus Eagle Ray compressor. In the second half of this year alone, I've looked at the Mitch Mason Maelstrom, the second hour Giant Stride, and a genuine compressor case by Christopher Ward. And that's only the stuff I've reviewed. There have been other watches by NTH, by Baltic, and by Nodus to name but a few. So yeah, it's definitely getting a little busy as far as dual crown divers are concerned. But that's not to say that there isn't room for another good one, and I think this is a good one. There are a total of 7 different variants available. I will of course leave a link to the Direnzo website in the description of the video. Blue, black or red, all date or no date, and a meteorite one, though I think the meteorite has sold already. He's taking pre-orders on this one at 650 Swiss francs at the moment. Regular price going up, I think next month, is going to be 720 Swiss francs. So as always, if you're keen, get in early. I will talk about some of the other competitors and where I think this one stacks up in terms of value a bit later on. Nice set of dimensions and specifications for your cash though. 39mm in diameter. I measure it at 13.4mm thick. I disagree with a couple of the measurements on the Direnzo website, so double check that one. 46.8mm lug to lug, 20mm lug width, tapering down to just under 18, back up to 21 at a fairly chunky clasp. You know I like these clasps. Sized up for me, 7-inch wrist, I get 154 grams. They measure it a little bit lighter, so I think they've gone slightly underweight on this one. I measure it 154, which is perfectly decent for this size and this style of watch. Stainless steel case, fixed bezel, dual 7mm stainless crowns, and yeah, I'll show you the case back in a minute or two. It is also stainless steel, make sure you stick around for that. 200 meters of water resistance, and that is a flat boxed sapphire crystal with a reasonable amount of anti-reflective undercoating. Beads of rice bracelet, super comfortable, screw links on those as well. And as intimated, I'm a fan of the clasp. 6 holes of micro adjust. It's a solid one, double security pushers, milled throughout, no problem at all getting a great fit with this, especially considering the gap between these links is pretty small. You can see from this angle just how much that flat boxed sapphire crystal protrudes from the bezel. Slight angle on the bezel, mostly brushed finish, really the only polish here, apart from on those mid links, the beads of rice as it were, is a little chamfered edge on each of those lugs. Nice crowns, Direnzo logo on that one, and a little red dot on that one. Again, that kind of circular pattern repeated at various points around the dial also. Now, I'm not Dr. Jody yet, but just pretend for a minute that I am. I've got 3 questions for you. What do you see here? Do you see a duck or do you see a rabbit? And what about here? Do you see an old hag or a beautiful young woman? And what about here? Do you see a spaceman fighting a Geiger alien, or do you see a vintage diver wrestling with an octopus? Slightly interpretive case pack design, shall we say. It looks really good, but I don't think there's a general consensus on what it actually represents yet. Screwed down obviously because it is 200 meters of water resistance and proudly designed there by Sergio Direnzo, Swiss made. Interestingly enough, it doesn't flag that it's Swiss made on the dial. I think it's only the second watch, and I can't remember what the first one was, that doesn't feature the word Swiss made on the dial. Interesting choice there. It really does keep the dial nice and clean though, as you'll see in just a second. Behind that case back is an Elaborate grade Sellita SW200. That's one rung off the bottom and a welcome addition for $650. So Elaborate grades are adjusted from the factory to 3 positions. They should be running within tolerances of plus or minus 20 maximum, but ideally plus or minus 7. This one just a hair over the top of that. Fabulously healthy amplitude and 0 beat error though. Sellita 200 obviously 26 jewel hacking and hand winding high beat Swiss made auto, hence Swiss made on the case back if not on the dial. Talking of the dial, let's head outside and have a look at it under macro. Now this one they call red. It's more kind of rust brown to my eye anyway. It's not quite the vibrant red of the DRZ03, the Eclipse that I showed you briefly earlier on. Still a very pleasant colourway and a variety of colours across the dial. You have a matte centre section, sector dial there. You've got pronounced lines on the points of the compass. You have a kind of fume sunburst outer section beyond that where the applied indices sit, and a third colour on that angled inner rotating bezel. All those indices are applied. You've got a prominent long truncated triangle up there at the 12 o'clock extending into that center section, 3 smaller truncated triangles at the 3, the 6 and the 9, applied circular indices everywhere else. Lovely handset, as I said, pretty much carried over from the 03 and very reminiscent of the Rado Captain Cook. High polished silver, beveled edge, nice amount of depth to them as well. But have a look at the markings on the inner rotating bezel if you haven't already done so. Again, Sergio styles these, they're not necessarily tool watches. Of course you can take this one diving, but you're probably going to use something a little bit more practical instead. No Arabics, no 15, 45 or 30. Instead you have 3 different circles. You have a circle with a hole in the middle at what would be the 15, a circle with a circle in the middle at the 30, and a circle solid white at the 45. Overall, a really interesting effect. Now this obviously is the no date, keeps the dial nice and clean. If you opt for a date, they do a porthole style date down at the 6 o'clock. Now I appreciate that this is a pre-production prototype and not necessarily representative, but there does appear to be a reasonable amount of BGW9 on the hands, on the indices and on that inner rotating bezel. If I turn the speed up though, the bezel is the first thing to go, but the hands and the indices do a reasonable job of hanging on in there. I can only imagine that will be better rather than worse for production units. Before I get it on wrist, I suppose I ought to show you the operation of that inner rotating bezel. Both of these crowns screw down, so unscrew the crown, there's a noticeable pop, and there we are, it immediately engages. And much like the giant stride that I reviewed a couple of months ago, you can feel through your fingers where the clicks are. Not all of these bezels, the inner rotating bezels, do that, but some do, and you've got no alignment issues when you can align the bezel yourself. And that's it on wrist. I have got a 7-inch wrist for your reference. I say that at this point in every single video that I make. Nice and comfortable because of that beads of rice bracelet. So 7 links, lots of articulation, very, very nice fit on me anyway. Compact lug to lug at 47, and there is a bit of downturn from the case, so yeah, it really wears well. It is a 39, but you don't really notice it's any smaller than a 40, especially not at 154 grams, so it still has plenty of presence, and that is a cracking clasp, as I have noted. Overhead shot, it's actually pretty legible. Now those unusual markings on the bezel do kind of compromise its utility as an out-and-out dive watch, but I don't think there's any compromise to its overall legibility as a daily. The hands are beautifully proportioned. The second hand perfectly sweeps the circle on the inner rotating bezel. The minute hand just touches those minute markers, so nicely sized and nicely legible still. Outside natural light, you can see when I move the watch around what I was talking about, the three distinct different tones, the three distinct different colours that you get on this dial. From matte finish as well to the fume sunburst, and then back to a matte finish for that bezel. On wrist it looks good. Look how well integrated that end link is with the case. Unlike certain watches that I've reviewed recently, Sergio, it actually looks like the bracelet was designed with this case in mind and vice versa. Before I start moaning about it, I did say I would circle back to compare it in terms of value for money against its closest rivals. 650 Swiss francs comes in at just about $700 and for that you're getting a Swiss made watch with an elaborate grade Sellita SW200. The NTH for comparison is $725 for an Asian made watch with a Miyota 9000. The Baltic is $725 for an Asian made watch with a Miyota 9000. The Nodus is $700 for an American assembled watch with a Miyota 9000. So I definitely think you're getting good value for money with the Direnzo. But is this 05 my favourite Direnzo so far? No, it's not. As I said, the red on the red 05 is not nearly as red as the red on the red 03, if you see what I mean. As I said, this is a pre-production prototype. I'm not sure whether the colours are going to change or they should just market it as kind of rust brown, blood red or something. It's just not quite the same colour, is it? I don't think the case quite has the same elegance as Sergio's other designs as well. It's a little bit pot-like when compared to the 03. And noticeably thicker and not quite as well finished as the 04. I appreciate the 04 only has 100 meters of water resistance though. So good value for money relative to its competition and an interesting and original design that very much has that Direnzo design language clearly evident on the dial and the handset. Just not quite up there with his best, I don't think. Perhaps that's because the standard has been set so high by those last two models. So there you have it, well done, you've almost finished the video. If you've made it this far, you're clearly a fan of Direnzo. Why not check out my previous reviews of the two watches I featured in the family photograph, the 3 and the 4. Thanks for watching, I'll see you all again soon.